When somebody is heckling me and I know that they're big tobacco, then I've hit a nerve and I'm just going to speak that louder, right? And so we had a poster that was also talking about quality assurance from vapes, and my student got heckled. The representative was really, really angry. And, she did a great job handling all of that and the questions and the attitude. And I thought, yeah, this is the space we need to be in.
Hello, and welcome to the Pittcon podcast. In this episode, we'll be speaking to Michelle Peace about what we know so far about vapes, ethanol, and drug testing. Well, thank you for joining us here today, Michelle. It's a pleasure. Firstly, please could you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your journey into forensic toxicology?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you for having me. We love coming to Pittcon and telling the story of the good work that's coming out of the research team. My name is Michelle Peace, and I am a forensic toxicologist, and I'm a professor in the Department of Forensic Science at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia.
Perfect. And your work on the efficacy of electronic cigarettes is quite extensive. What initially led you to study e-cigarettes, particularly in the context of substance use and abuse?
That is a great question. I appreciate having that question because it really celebrates the value and the importance of having undergrads in the research environment. And so I guess it was around 2011, 2012. I am literally just advising students on, what courses they need to take. So I had a young woman who had been studying abroad, and she's back into my office trying to get back on track so she can graduate on time. And, while I'm pulling up forms and documents, et cetera, she's filling the time by chatting about what her experience was in her study abroad. And she says, Dr. Peace, you really need to look at these things called vapes. And in whenever that was, 2011, 2012, I had no idea what she was talking about. And so, of course, I Google it up while she's sitting there. And I told her, I was like, maybe this is interesting, but as a forensic toxicologist, I'm more concerned about drugs and poisons, that are, potentially harmful to people, cause impairment. Said, I don't know why I would be interested in studying these because they're just nicotine. And she says, yeah, but they're everywhere in Europe. And they were just beginning to really push into the U.S. marketplace. And so they weren't widely popular at the time. So I thought about what she said and about their prevalence in Europe, and because I'm more interested in the way people consume other substances, I thought the products at the time, you couldn't manipulate them, but I thought we're going to get to a place one day where people can. And so if they can figure out how to open the device, they will put other drugs in them. So that's how the research got started. We collected some preliminary data and pitched the idea to the National Institute of Justice, and we were funded. So we started that work in 2013 and got funded in 2014. So.
That's fascinating, thank you. And in your research, you've highlighted emerging issues with e-cigarettes being used for vaping drugs other than nicotine, like you've just mentioned. Could you elaborate on the most significant findings in this area in recent years?
I think what's interesting, right? We've been studying e-cigarettes and vapes for a little bit more than a decade. So there have been a number of, I think, really important things that have come out of that research. And in terms of importance, I think it really does depend on sometimes what audience you're speaking to, right? So NIJ supports some of the work that we do to evaluate vapes that children have access to. And so, it's hugely important to understand what children are consuming, not just the substance, right? I mean, predominantly it's nicotine. In more recent years, we're seeing, cannabis products in high schools, right? They're vapes. But also, what other chemicals are they exposed to? Whether that is a solvent like ethanol or ethyl acetate, or some of these flavoring chemicals that I think one of the most disturbing plot lines, so to speak, is that people generally think that the chemicals that are used for flavoring or the carriers, the humectants in the devices, they're safe in our food products, right? The Food and Drug Administration recognizes them as generally regarded as safe in our food products, but they're not safe to inhale. So from that perspective, we think that's a really important storyline to tell. We think that the other piece really is about the fact that most vapes now are not regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, right? The Food and Drug Administration has only essentially put their stamp of approval on only a handful of products, 7 or 8. And there are more than 9,000 types of products in the marketplace. And so the disturbing thing around that is that the products are not labeled properly. They're not transparent. We're finding that in the unregulated marketplace, the nicotine concentration doesn't match what's on the label, that there are extensive solvents, in some products. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't vape, they're legal products over the age of 21, but consumers should be able to make informed decisions about what they are consuming. So we think that's an important message, that there needs to be transparency in that industry. That's all about public health. If we think about how all of that actually presses into criminal justice purposes, or maybe not so much criminal justice, but if you're helping with substance use treatment and prevention programs, right, where if people are putting other drugs into their vapes, because it's easier to consume or because vaping is socially acceptable and they can vape what are otherwise highly stigmatized drugs, and they can do that publicly and nobody's going to question that. I think that really needs to inform substance use treatment and prevention. We definitely see issues around vaping that if you're just taking, you have to submit for a drug test, particularly if it's, you work for an employer who, needs to make sure that you're not drinking in the work site. If you are vaping, then there's going to be some chance that if that breath test was not performed adequately, if it wasn't performed according to standard protocols, then that person might be positive for consuming ethanol, even if all they were doing was vaping. So I think, again, depending on who the audience is, then there are different themes that come out of the research that we've done.
Definitely. That was so enlightening and raised so many points that I'd never thought about before. And I imagine the general public would be exactly the same. They wouldn't think about, how socially acceptable vapes are, like the paraphernalia associated with, even, for example, ethanol, a bottle, a can, it's so fascinating. And I think education is so important around this topic.
It is. It's critical. And I think that does wind up being at least for me, some of my most frustrating experiences is that the general public really needs to know. And so platforms like this and other kinds of platforms that we get to talk about the research become really, really critical for us sharing the message, right? So our arc from what I consider bench to policy or bench to protocol, that arc is very short for my lab, right? So just a couple of months ago, we had an incident where we had literally a case come into the lab, and it's one of the things that we're presenting here today. I was literally speaking to policymakers inside of a week because of something we found in the vapes, in the unregulated marketplace. And, and so that's pretty powerful, but we need platforms to be able to talk about that because there's so much mythology that still exists.
And you need the protocols in place because obviously, with substances such as these are potentially, life or death situations. So really significant. So on that, your current project involves assessing the impact of vaping on roadside impairment evaluations for suspected DUI and drug testing. Can you share some of the preliminary insights or challenges you've encountered in this study?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had been collecting e-liquids for a couple of years in the lab, and we had a situation arise. There was two situations between me and my collaborator that we were like, is there solvent in these products, right? Because we had been very busy just analyzing for the chemical flavorants, the substance, right, the pharmacological substance, and he had independently, something had rung a bell for him that there might be ethanol in these products. And I had gone across the street to get a cup of coffee in a convenience store, and the store had e-liquids and pods on the consumer side of the cash register, which is an important point, right? All tobacco products are on the cashier side of the cash register. You have to ask for the product. But for vaping products, they're on the consumer side, which is dangerous, right? High theft, particularly with children. Mm-hmm. And so I'm rifling through, right? Because I'm just curious, right? And so we're used to seeing bubblegum flavored, right? Cupcake flavored vape products, and somewhere in the middle of the box was something called whiskey flavored, and I thought, is that just going to be caramel, vanilla, or is that been flavored with whiskey? So we purchased it and took it back to the lab and checked it for ethanol. Of course, it had ethanol in it. Mm-hmm. And so we stopped everything. I had the students stop everything at the time. And I said, the most important thing you will do today is to analyze every single product we have here for ethanol. And so that's where we found that some of the products that was in our lab at the time was as much as 20% ethanol. We were stunned by that. It was not surprising that there was going to be trace ethanol, right? Because most of the flavoring chemicals are in a solvent. But 20%? So then what has happened since then is that we have, it's been published, and we have also found in the lab that some e-liquids are as much as 30% ethanol. So one of the things as a forensic toxicologist that we got really concerned about was that the administration of the breath test. And because you're inhaling ethanol, it's bypassing the gut, right? So you're not drinking ethanol, which goes to the gut. The gut serves as protection. You're inhaling it, so it goes straight to the brain. And so we thought, is somebody going to feel some kind of momentary, they're going to feel nauseous or dizzy or, right, impaired, whatever that might mean for them, right? So we went back to the National Institute of Justice and said, we really think we need to do a study where we have people vape ethanol. And they funded that project for us as well. So we've had participants come in, and they vape either a 0% or a 20% ethanol that we had specially made for the project. And so one of the interesting things that has come out of that data is that when law enforcement administers the breath test, there is a protocol that says that they need to have a period of time that they have eyes on the subject. And they have to watch that person for 15 to 20 minutes to make sure that they haven't belched, that they don't have anything in their mouth, because they want to be able to measure the ethanol that's coming from your deep lung tissue. So if you belch ethanol, you're going to have ethanol in your mouth, right? So for law enforcement, there's that protocol that they have to wait 15 to 20 minutes. But for other people who administer, for other agencies that administer the breath test, they oftentimes don't honor that, right? And so as soon as you walk in, they might, they're not necessarily watching for if you belch. They're not watching if you've consumed anything. They've not, right? You need to have that deprivation period. So we're concerned that if somebody's just walking right up and they've literally just been vaping, that if you're not going to observe that 15 to 20 minute wait period, you're going to have a positive on the breath test. Well, that turned out to be true. So we've done a lot of education around making sure that no matter what industry you're in, if you are administering a breath test, that you have to wait 15 to 20 minutes just to make sure that somebody hasn't been vaping, they're not belching, right? Have eyes on them to make sure that the test that you're going to administer is going to capture the ethanol that is coming out of the deep lung tissue. So, I mean, it was not anything that we didn't expect, but it is so important to get that into the literature, the scientific literature, because we literally see attorneys who say, I can help get you out of a DUI if you admit that you vape. Right? That's, if somebody was truly impaired at the time they were driving, then they need to be accountable for that. And so, again, the results weren't anything that we didn't anticipate, but to be able to say that definitively is important.
Yeah, definitely. And out of interest, what did it look like for the actual individuals who were having that higher percentage ethanol vape? Like, what behaviours did they sort of exhibit, and what did that look like?
So it was really interesting. I'm glad you asked that. We were looking for trends. So we did ask participants, how do you feel? So they had to take a series of little quizzes, right? Do you feel sick? Do you feel talkative? Right? To try to capture how they're feeling. And the data showed no trends. It was all over the board, right? But there were a handful of subjects that said, yes, I feel impaired. I would not drive. We had some subjects get very, very dizzy. Some felt very, very sick. And so while the study demonstrated that there was like no, definable trend in any of that, from the perspective that one driver who feels impaired gets behind the wheel of a car and then potentially kills somebody, one person is significant, whether a trend existed or not. And so, so again, that's part of the educational piece that to communities and to consumers that, you need to be thoughtful about this, and to a regulatory agency of you should require that all products have ingredients listed on them, including ethanol. And all of the studies we have done probably thousands of products we've tested, we've maybe, I think, only found one or two that had ethanol labeled.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. And it just goes to show as well, I think, this is an example of science translating into real life. Like maybe in a scientific study, they would want that significant correlation. But like you said, in real life, all it takes is one person in one situation to really have an impact. But going on to your talk abstract here at Pittcon, you mentioned the identification of a variety of chemicals in e-liquids, like you've already mentioned, with known health and safety implications. How significant is the presence of these chemicals, such as ethanol, in terms of public health? I know you've touched on this already, but if you've got anything else to add.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's worth a little bit of a deeper dive in terms of this public health perspective. So what we appreciate, we just take the drug or the pharmacologically active substance, let's just take that off the table. Let's talk about all of the other ingredients that are in vapes. The propylene glycol and the vegetable glycerin are hygroscopic, right? Meaning they attract water. Your deep lung tissue has a layer of water in it, right? And that layer of water facilitates oxygen exchange, carbon dioxide exchange, right? So you are inhaling those two chemicals, the predominant ingredients, and they're hygroscopic, and they are going to dry out that deep lung tissue, right? Which is going to create an irritation, which is going to call for inflammation, right? And so that person is going to potentially exhibit characteristics from they could have a hacky cough to popcorn lung, right? And they'll experience that. So there are some significant issues just with those two chemicals. With regards to all of the other chemicals that are in the e-liquids, the concern is that when you look at their hazard classifications, most, if not all of them, are considered irritants, toxins, or carcinogens in lung tissue. And so this is where, the manufacturers have been leveraging, but they're generally regarded as safe. No, they're not. They are known hazards, particularly in lung tissue. So again, we've got now if you combine those two things, you've got like propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin are hygroscopic. They are creating an irritation in deep lung tissue, right? Because they're drying out the deep lung tissue. And now we're putting an irritant in on top of that. And so this is where I think we're not capturing, let's say, health surveys widely enough, right? Or deeply enough, is that, physicians aren't necessarily asking, do you vape? Right? So somebody shows up and they've got a rattly cough and they're going to tell them, well, you've got the flu or you've got a bug or something like that. When, in some instances, those people vape. And so we've seen it. We've worked a couple of cases where somebody has been reported as having these flu-like symptoms, rattly cough. This was a soldier in the somebody in the military. And he has this cyclical behavior over the course of about a year and a half where he's got this rattly cough. He reports, to the medic and they say, okay, fluids and rest. Well, he stops vaping because he doesn't feel well. So he begins to get better. Well, he gets better, he starts vaping again, and it happens again. So when you look at his records, it's this cycle on and off, right? And so at the end of the day, he had, the reason why it came to us was that both of his lungs collapsed and he went into a coma. And so we received all of his products just looking for something that could have, and there was nothing unusual about the products that he was using. And, so we just think that at the end of the day, he was just injuring his lungs. So one of the things that we like to do is speak to medical professionals about, you have to start asking if people are vaping, because potentially, whether that is a runny nose, right, because that aerosol with the propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin is going to dry out your nasal passages to your lung tissue, right? So we just have to get better from a health perspective of physicians asking questions, nurses asking questions.
Especially when one of the standard questions that you're asked pretty much every time you go to the physician is, do you smoke?
Yep, absolutely.
So that it definitely should be asked if you vape. You've already mentioned the gaps in product labelling of e-liquids. What steps do you believe should be taken to address this particular issue?
So the Food and Drug Administration, has a process where companies will have the Food and Drug Administration evaluate their products, and the FDA will then put their stamp of approval and say, yes, we oversee this product, you have to fit inside of these requirements. Honestly, I think that a couple of things have to happen. One is that we have to have better education and surveillance of products in the marketplace, right? So 7 or 8 products are currently approved by the Food and Drug Administration, and there's 9,000 in the marketplace. So I think the first thing is that we have to identify what all those products are, talk to those manufacturers, get them taken off the shelves. And I think that the Food and Drug Administration, whatever that bureaucracy is of evaluating the applications, that has to move faster, right? Because maybe there's a reason why companies aren't pushing their products through the regulatory process, because it's burdensome, takes a long time, right? There are hurdles. I don't know what keeps companies from doing it. It might just be expensive and they don't want it to impact their bottom line. I don't know what that is. But I think the two things have to happen is that we've got to get more regulated products into the marketplace that requires labeling, requires transparency of ingredients, those kinds of things. And I think we have to do better compliance evaluations.
Yeah, definitely. And just going back for a moment to the analysis of some of these e-liquids, what are the technologies that you typically use in the forensic lab to investigate the composition of these e-liquids? Sure.
So we've got a pretty standard slate of instruments that are used in general forensic tox, forensic chemistry laboratories, right? So one of the missions of my research lab is that we support crime lab work. We support forensic science. So whatever it is that we do in the lab, we share all of our methods with crime labs so that they can adopt different methods as products roll out. So the instruments that we have might not necessarily be cutting edge, but they're what crime labs have. So we have time-of-flight mass spectrometry that we use. We have gas chromatography mass spectrometry. We have liquid chromatography with tandem mass spec. We've got GCs with FIDs for volatiles analysis. So we have an array of equipment that we use to analyze these. But again, it's all meant to, provide methods for crime labs that have those instruments.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And are there any technological advancements you see as being particularly impactful in this particular area of study?
So I think one of the pieces that we've really come to conclude in my research lab, and this happens in crime labs generally speaking, is that having a single technique is not going to get you all of the answers that you need, right? So we use all of those instruments as a big team. So we use one instrument to get us one answer, and then we essentially confirm that using another instrument. And oftentimes we have to use those in unison to say, all right, well, this happened on this instrument, this happened on this instrument. Let's use a third instrument to get us a better answer, right? So we use all of those together because we need to put that story together and then confirm, what we think our conclusion is. And we do that multiple times. And so it has to be in unison. So there's not necessarily one that's been most important. We really they all have equal importance in the lab, so we have to use them as a suite.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But looking ahead, what are the next steps for you in your research in this area?
So we have a second clinical study ongoing right now. And one of the things, we're down this drug testing path, right? Very concerned about, it's not just workplace drug testing. It is, drug courts. And there are some school systems that are conducting drug tests, right, in order for kids to be eligible to play sports. So substance use treatment and prevention clinics are administering they're collecting some kind of biological, right, to at least confirm that somebody has been, abstinent from particularly ethanol, as the case may be. And so because they're collecting those biologicals, because we're very concerned about, it doesn't matter how you consume ethanol, you're still going to have the ethanol is going to be in your biological tissues, and the biomarkers are going to be in your biological tissues. And so the question became, can we tell if somebody vaped? Are you going to have more of them? Let's say somebody has not been consuming alcohol orally. They've not been drinking alcohol. They show up to give a urine sample or a blood sample or oral fluid, and it comes back positive for the biomarkers of ethanol. Well, is that reasonable that they had those biomarkers in those tissues from vaping ethanol? So that's what we're looking at now. We're collecting not just the breath, but we're collecting oral fluid, blood, and urine as well to evaluate, I think, 6 biomarkers of ethanol, right? Because there are some of the biomarkers that are used pretty standardly in forensic tox, but there's also a different slate of biomarkers that are used in clinical tox. So we're going to look at all of those biomarkers in relationship to each other to see if we can tweeze out anything with regards to the impact of vaping ethanol.
And looking at the research field as a whole, are there any specific areas within the study of e-cigarettes as a field that you're particularly excited to see evolve in the coming years?
I say this with humility, that my research team has been very progressive, right? We were some of the first that have really talked about how e-cigarettes can be used to vape other substances. We've been out front in discussing ethanol. One of the presentations this week is about ethyl acetate, which is a really common solvent that got used as an affirmative defense, right? Meant that we couldn't rule out vaping as the reason why somebody was positive for ethanol. At least in terms of those advancements, my research team has been pretty out front. We're constantly talking about what's the next thing. That sends us to some dark places sometimes, right? We're really concerned about the advice that's given in drug user forums with regards to how do you crush up your prescription medication and get those into vapes. Where we continue to be concerned about solvents that are in the vapes and children getting access to those. Really concerned about the unregulated products in the marketplace. So we'll just continue down that path. Frankly, where I see like the biggest space that I'm most frustrated about, which makes me the most excited about it, is how do I get this information into communities, right? If I can't change the system from the top, I will work at the bottom and hopefully influence policy and some kind of restrictions, right? Inform communities about the nature of these, and then that trickles upwards, right? So that's what I'm really eager about. So we're looking at funding to help us develop educational programs that will make our research, our data, easy for communities to understand it. And so that's what we're working on right now.
Pittcon Perspectives. Unforgettable Pittcon moments from the experts.
As we mark the 75th anniversary of Pittcon, could you share your first memory or experience of attending this conference and how it impacted your view of the scientific community?
I've not been coming to Pittcon very long. Of course, we're really interested in coming to support the National Institute of Justice and their symposia. Pittcon has been a really great forum for the National Institute of Justice, so that it's great exposure to other scientists to see how advancements can be used to help criminal justice purposes, forensic science purposes. So that's interesting. We were really interested in a different forum for our research. And so one of my first experiences at Pittcon was during an oral presentation that I was giving. I was heckled in the middle of the presentation because the tobacco industry is here and they were very upset by what we were presenting. So I got heckled, and I was not upset by that. I was actually like, yes, because that meant that we hit a nerve. And so one of the things that we learned early on when we first found ethanol, we went to a meeting to talk about our research. And a lot of big tobacco representatives were there. A lot of big tobacco scientists were in this forum. And somebody asked the question, is there ethanol in any of these products? And across the board, the representatives from big tobacco said no. And I was about to get on stage and present that, look at all the ethanol we found in products. And right, so back to Pittcon, when somebody is heckling me and I know that they're big tobacco, then I've hit a nerve and I'm just going to speak that louder, right? And so we had a poster that was also talking about quality assurance from vapes. And my student got heckled, right? Approached, right? The representative was really, really angry. And, she did a great job handling all of that and the questions and the attitude. And I thought, yeah, this is the space we need to be in. Because I'm okay with that confrontation, right? It's one of the reasons why you come is like, there's so many industries here. So I think that continues to be why we come, is it's really cool to see, all right, there's a new widget that could I probably leverage that, to explore a little more deeply? Is there a new, application? There's so much, evolution that, at least from a forensic perspective, it's going to be years, decades before forensic science might adopt some things for lots of reasons. But research scientists like myself and some of the other academic forensic scientists that are here, we're always looking for what could be the new thing that we can use to help, to help tell the science that, that supports the court systems.
Yeah. And this year is the first year that Pittcon is in San Diego. What have you been most looking forward to about Pittcon 2024 in San Diego?
San Diego.
Yeah.
No, so one of the things that, again, one of the reasons why we appreciate coming to Pittcon is that we get to see the vendors that help support our research projects. We get to see them in a little bit of a different light, right? Because most of them will come to the forensic science conferences. And it's always great to see them in that space, but to see them in a different space, because sometimes they will roll out cooler things, newer things at a conference like this, because there are so many other industries here that really, really, really do embrace cutting edge things. So it's fun to see them in this element, and we really highly value those relationships as well. So it sparks different conversations for us sometimes.
Yeah, and has there ever been an instance where you've seen maybe a piece of kit that you maybe wouldn't have normally seen at another show that then caught your interest and you investigated further?
Yeah, we've definitely some instruments and some equipment that we've seen here. We'll be rolling it around. We'll talk to the companies afterwards and say, hey, is it possible for us to demo that? Can we talk about that more? They're also the vendors that we work with have also been really open to, all right, I have this problem. And if the instrument or the equipment just did this, and they've gone back and and provided that feedback back to the company, so the relationships are valuable, and science won't progress without them. So that's one of the other reasons why we love coming to Pittcon, right? Is because you see the future. Yeah.